Greetings fellow Mist Wanderers, my name is Steve Morgan and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Shroud and Ravenloft. I recently did a video all about mist travel, travelling the mists between domains, different domains of dread. Shortly after putting the video out, I realised I could have included a section talking about monsters you can encounter in the mists, and I thought, oh no, I can't believe I forgot that. But then I realised I could just do another separate video, and to be honest with you, the number of choices I have for you today, I think it's warranted a separate video. I think it would have dominated that other video. So this is a follow-up to my mist travel video. This is all about monsters. So in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, the Ravenloft sourcebook, I'm going to assume that if you're running a domain hopping campaign, you have that. There is information about the mists, and I talk about that in the mist travel video, obviously. There's a Wandering the Mists table, and there are a few monster suggestions in that. I'm going to talk about those. I'm going to talk about a few more that I've added to my game, or may add to my game, or just ideas I thought work well, and see how we go. The sources are the Monster Manual. I'm still using the 2014 version, please forgive me, I've still not had a chance to buy the core books, it is on my to-do list. But if I talk about any monsters, presume I'm talking about the old version, not the new version, although they're probably in both. As well as Van Richten's Guide. Mordenkainen presents Monsters of the Multiverse, which, if you've got Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes or Volo's Guide to Monsters, is like got all of those combined and they're updated. And Tome of Beasts as well, Kobold Press. I did a video a while back where I talked about a number of choices that work well as Ravenloft monsters. And you'll notice a pattern. So the Domains of Dread are part of the Shadowfell, or at least in 5th edition. So expect a number of choices from the Shadowfell, linked to the Shadowfell. I believe it's Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes and therefore Monsters of the Multiverse, where there's quite a few monsters from the Shadowfell, so expect quite a few choices from that. One thing I'd like to talk about first of all is the mists as a whole, as sort of like the battleground and the sort of lead up to a combat encounter. When I run my game, I like to play up the mists' nothingness. It's literally just mist. They could be walking through the mists with their mistasm for hours, see weird shapes in the distance, maybe hear weird screams, but just encounter nothing for ages. And not every time they travel through the mists, they encounter monsters, and this is important as well, because you don't want it to be like every single time they go somewhere, you drop a monster on them and then it becomes expected, it becomes a pattern. So I'd probably use these seldomly, and only if like they do a lot of travel between different domains, and they maybe one in every 2 or 3 or 4 times they travel the mists, they have one encounter with a monster, maybe 2. And then in terms of it being a battlefield, there's just mist everywhere. So the good thing is you can have monsters coming out of nowhere, maybe do a stealth roll versus passive perception. You can do a build-up, you can do ambience, you can keep it spooky. Maybe they hear the sound of the monster first before it approaches. Stuff like that, you can have a lot of fun. I remember one of the times I dropped, and this is going to be in the list, an Unspeakable Horror just dropped on the deck of the Relentless, which is their ship they took from Pietro van Ries in the Sea of Sorrows, and that's how they travel around domains these days. And just, I said, you hear a distant roar and then boom, and this huge monster lands. So when you're planning these encounters, be mindful about stuff like that as well. Right, onto the list of monsters. I'm going to start firstly with a rules of written suggestion I've already just mentioned. Then I'm going to offer monsters A to Z, and then we'll talk about other suggestions that kind of better explain to like mini groups. So first of all, and I'm bringing this one right at the beginning because it's the main one mentioned in Van Richten's Guide, and it starts with the letter U, so it would have been the last one, one of the last ones if I did A to Z, is the Unspeakable Horror. This appears in Van Richten's Guide in the Bestiary section. What I really like about this monster is every time your players encounter it, you can have some sort of different variant. What's 4 times 4 times 4? 64 different variations, if my maths is right there. Because there's 4 body types, there's 4 hex blast attacks it can do, and it's got 4 limb types as well. And you can either choose from a list, or you can roll a d4 3 times, or 3d4, and choose. And I like to roll the dice and see what they get. Although they've only encountered Unspeakable Horrors twice, and both times I rolled, they were completely different. If I rolled a 3rd time, and if I had to do it a 3rd time and got something very similar to one of the other times, I might mix and match it. But the point I'm getting at is completely customizable. And the great thing as well is if they see it a second time and think, I remember it doesn't attack that does psychic damage, well, this version might be the one that does acid damage instead. So they can't rely on their past knowledge of fighting the monster and, you know, sort of defend themselves and attack it accordingly, because this could be a completely different version. Because of all the different variants, I recommend this book anyway. There's The Monsters Know What They're Doing, and there's a series of books, but there's also a blog, and on the blog he's done most, if not all, of the Van Richten Guide monsters, which I don't think appear in either of his books. that cover monsters from like Monster Manual, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Volo's Guide to Monsters. So I'll include a link to that in the description. I think that was handy for me. If it's the Oozing Organs version, or the Loathsome Limbs version, or it's the Bile Hex Blast, or the Petrifying Hex Blast, I'm pretty sure it covers all of those. You also might want to give it some minions as well. So one of the times I rolled and I got, I think, the Oozing Organs and the Acid Limbs, and so I decided to give him some Ooze minions as well. Just to kind of, I thought flavoured like blobs that sort of drop off it that are their own kinds of monsters. I thought was quite cool. Next up we have, still not doing A to Z yet because this is a group and they're quite critical in my game, quite key to the Mists and Mist travel. It's the Sorrowsworn. Sorrowsworn appear in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, and then they're updated in Mordenkainen Presents Monsters of the Multiverse. There are 5 variants. From weakest to strongest, you have the Wretched, that's a quarter challenge rating. The Lost is 7, the Lonely is 9, the Hungry is 11, and the Angry is 13. I've used the first 4 in my game, and I'm going to use the 5th when my players visit Hazlan. I'm going to have a mage that's captured the Angry and wants to use it for experiments, but then it turns on its captor, and then my players have got to defeat it. I also have a homebrew rule in my game to try and make sure they always have Mist Talismans when they travel to places. If you arrive into a Domain of Dread without Mist Talisman, there is a small chance you can introduce Sorrowsworn from the Mists. They sort of follow after you. So when they arrived in Markovia, which is the first place they went to after Barovia, having done Curse of Strahd and defeated Strahd, they were quickly joined by the Lonely variant and a number of the Wretched. The Wretched are quite small, weak, so I had quite a few of those. They are quite deadly monsters if they roll high on the damage or get a natural 20, so just proceed with caution. They can be pretty brutal, but hey, it's Ravenloft, you want it to be brutal, right? They also look the part as well. I love their art. They look weird, they look scary, they look Ravenloft. Now we'll start with the A to Z. First up is Allip. Allip is from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. I don't think it's true to the lore. I think the lore, it says that the Allips are like people or wizards who are kind of obsessed with magic and it's kind of transformed them, but they look really misty. And I just can totally see one of these just coming out, you know, your characters are walking through the mists and then an Allip appears. You know, I think it just looks alone, ignoring the lore, I think it looks perfect. And I've only run Allips a few times. I think I ran them in Forlorn, if memory serves, and they're quite a cool, fun monster to run. Next up we have Boneless. Boneless appear in Van Richten's Guide as well, so if you've got that, then you'll have access to that. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on them other than they look cool and they're nice sort of variety on the, you know, classic undead like zombie and skeleton. And I used them, if memory serves, in Folkovnia. I had a bunch of Boneless on one of the trips. They went outside Lakar and then they were attacked by some Boneless. Next up we have the Nightwalker. The Nightwalker is Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse. Its lore says it's from the negative plane, not the Shadowfell, but you can reach the negative plane from the Shadowfell in places where the barrier between the planes is thin. So I'm thinking like maybe it ventures and appears in the mists and it attacks in the mists. I mean, I'm basing it based on how it looks. It looks like something you'd encounter in the mists, but you've also got like a potential lore tie in there if you want to keep it true to the lore. Also, big warning, it's got a very high challenge rating. It is not, you know, not to be underestimated by your players. I would only probably throw it at your players if, you know, it does a quick attack and then leaves, or, you know, a higher level party perhaps. The Shadar-kai, I believe that's how you pronounce it. I looked up a D&D video just to double check. Again, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. I didn't mean to include so many from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, but it just happened that way. Updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. They are described as a race of elves native to from the Shadowfell. So perhaps there's one time the PCs are wandering through the mists and they encounter a group. There's 3 kinds, at least in Mordy's Tome of Foes, Mordy's Monsters of the Multiverse. Shadow Dancer, Gloomweaver, and Soulmonger. I'm actually going to use Gloomweaver, I think it is, in Hazlan. But I do like the idea of they just kind of encounter maybe 2 or 3 of them in the mist sometime. Shadow Dragons. Monster Manual. They are dragons born in the Shadowfell, or dragons that weren't born in the Shadowfell but have spent so long in the Shadowfell that it's kind of transformed them. If you do plan to use a Shadow Dragon as a random encounter in the mists, I would probably suggest using either just a young or an adult variant. Save the Ancient for the named Ravenloft dragon, Ebb in Darkon, who is basically the Dark Lord Azalin Rex's main lieutenant slash dragon slash steed, because I think he rides on it as well, which is pretty cool. Shadow Mastiffs, again described as hounds of the Shadowfell and the Shadowfell one. They appear in Volo's Guide to Monsters this time, updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. They look the part. They are cool. I think I've only run them once or twice maybe, and not as a Mists encounter, but I think they could work well. There's also an alpha variant, which is a little bit stronger and has a recharge attack called Terrifying Howls. You could have like an alpha leading a couple of regulars, and that could be the encounter. Shroud. This is from Tome of Beasts, as mentioned earlier, Kobold Press. They are described as being weaker variants of shadows. They're like shadows that haven't fully developed into shadows yet, as per the lore info. So it could be good for a low-level party where you think throwing shadows at them could be too much, or should throw more of these and they're weaker. I think they just look the part. I think they're cool, and just a nice alternative for shadows. Skulks. I love these. I talk about them in my alternative Curse of Strahd random encounters video. They appear in Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, again, Monsters of the Multiverse. They are described as being lost in the Shadowfell. They are a Shadowfell monster. They are right at home here, no pun intended. And what I love about them is, even though they're quite weak, they're a low challenge rating, they are invisible, except for really weird circumstances, one of which is a mirror, one of which is only children under a certain age can see them, and something about a weird candle. I can't remember, I haven't got the info in front of me, but I remember in the other video I was just like, what? But weird but cool. So, that's a great horror monster. They're in the mists, they're trying to find their way in, they're attacked by creatures they can't even see. That is beautiful. Vampiric Mist, Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes again, I believe, Monsters of the Multiverse, and also appeared in a Tales from the Yawning Portal adventure called Dead in Thay. The Vampiric Mist, they're mist in the mists. I swear I didn't choose them just because they had mist in the name. I'm not that uncreative, I hope. In Monsters of the Multiverse, at least, it might say this in Tome of Foes as well, they are wretched remnants of vampires that were prevented from finding rest, indistinguishable from the mists they lurk within. That's like perfect, I think. Yeah, that they, when there's a multitude of vampires in Ravenloft as a whole, some are Dark Lords, you've got the Karjat in Darkon, it could be one of those that's then turned into this misty mist in the mist. Will-o-wisps. These are from the monster manual. They're pretty classic horror monster. You could have them light the way. They see a light in the distance and they approach, and it guides them to danger, which is, I think the will-o-wisp's main deal is something like that. You could even be really cruel as a DM, and maybe the first time it happens, it leads them to something good. Maybe some treasure, maybe something useful. And then the next time it happens, it leads them to their doom. And because they might think, hey, this might lead us to treasure again, and they find out the hard way. The last one in my A to Z list is not from any of the sources I've mentioned already. It's actually from Castles Forlorn, a old Ravenloft module. But when I was running a Forlorn, I got a conversion guide, and in both the original adventure and the conversion guide, there are zombie wolves. Now, I had an encounter prepared where on the way back from Castle Tristanoara to where their hideout was, while stuck in Forlorn, they would get ambushed by a bunch of zombie wolves, but my wizard cast teleport and completely bypassed that encounter, and then I couldn't find a good place to just insert some zombie wolves. So for me personally, I think zombie wolves are a great addition, because you can't really justify wolves being in the mists, lost in the mists. How do they eat? What if they feed on? But zombie wolves don't need to eat because they're undead. So they can just wander the mists for eternity, or until they stumble across your PCs. And I believe they're a little bit stronger than regular wolves, especially because of the undead fortitude ability, the whole thing that zombies have where, unless it's critical hit or radiant damage, you've got to do a huge chunk of damage or they get back up again. Like the Chumbawamba song. And I appreciate, you may not want to go out of your way to buy the Castles Forlorn or the conversion guide just to get the stat block. But if you have access to those already, or you're thinking of running Forlorn, I thought it was worth mentioning it. That's it from the main list, the A to Z. I've got kind of like two groups now, where they're and I'll give some examples. You could include monsters from a domain as a potential lead-in to a domain, or a sort of hook, or a seed, or a lead to a domain. So for example, if you want to run the Shadowlands, I'm planning to have like armoured ghouls be some of the minions, because I understand that ghouls are quite common in the Shadowlands, but it's also like the Land of Knights and heroic tales, and sort of, I think someone described the Shadowlands as like Arthur's Round Table if it was horror. So Tome of Beasts has some great monsters, great variants of ghouls where they wear armour, so you could just have a bunch of those wandering around. And then, your players might think, where do they come from? What's their deal? You could have evil fake creatures heading to the carnival, which ties into the whole Isolde Zabilna thing, if you've read the carnival information about Richten's guide. An example could be like an Aridni, which I think I used on the banner for this video, and I recently ran one of the times my players visited the carnival, who were basically like evil pixies. They're great. Soldiers from Tovag. So in the lore for Tovag, Kaz likes to send out armies to try and find and defeat Vecna or find stuff for him. They can encounter one of his groups of armies, you know, and then find out from those. Maybe they rescue them, because I think the idea is that they're sort of like unequipped, unarmed commoners, and they might be like, we don't want to fight in this army, well, please rescue us, and then, you know, you got to get them to safety somewhere. You could have vampires and vampire spawn from the Karjat. That's the secret police in Darkon. You could just literally just have your players walking along, especially if they're a higher level party and have access to sunlight, like the Sun Sword or the Holy Symbol of Ravenkind from Curse of Shroud / Barovia. You could have just a vampire with some vampire spawn minions, be like, hello there, you know, we're hungry and we're going to feed, even though we're actually on our way to, you know, X domain. I just think it's a great opportunity to open up possibilities of the domains. If the players, if one of them reveals that they, I use that last example, that they are the Karjat from Darkon, they might then think, who the Karjat? Well, where's its Darkon place? Pro tip, if you do this, make sure that it's an open domain, because if it's a domain that is pretty much entirely closed, what's an example? Forlorn. I had it that Forlorn is always closed at all times. If you have a goblin with a Y, just wandering the mist randomly, that doesn't really make sense. Or anything from Barovia, I guess, because I think in Curse of Shroud the border's always closed. And I'm sure there's other domains as well where the borders are always closed. I just can't think off the top of my head, because obviously there's some domains where they're kind of only closed in certain circumstances, or they're open all the time. The Dark Lord doesn't care. And then lastly, and just to kind of bring it back full circle to the Wandering the Mists table, you can just have regular undead. In addition to Unspeakable Horror, which is the first monster I covered, it suggests a group of skeletons. You have skeletons, zombies, shadows, wights, ghosts, or if you fancy something a bit tougher, ghost knights from Tome Beasts. Basically look like skeletons but a much higher challenge rating. I'm probably going to throw those at my players from now on instead of skeletons, because my players are like level 16, I think. And when they get to the end game, they're going to be level 17. So I think they're probably a little bit above skeletons in terms of difficulty right now and challenge rating. And that's it for this one. What do you think? Do you know any monsters I've missed? No. I swear to you, that's not in my notes. That was a genuine, no pun intended. What monsters have I missed? Ha ha ha. Please let me know what monsters I've missed in the mists. And from whatever source, other 5th edition sources, other third-party sources such as Tome of Beasts, there are things I've missed from classic Ravenloft lore. You guys know me, as I've said in other videos, I only got into Ravenloft as a 5th edition, but I do like to dig into the old lore and, you know, trying to honour and respect the old lore as much as possible, but I don't know the old lore very well, and maybe I've missed a really obvious mist monster that it could be something that, you know, my players could encounter or other people's players could encounter. Please do let me know, and let others know in the comments below. Upcoming videos, I still do plan to do my Factions of Ravenloft video, I just don't know when that'll be. I also plan to do an other uses for the Taroka deck video. Obviously, famously, the Taroka deck is used in Curse of Strahd, but I know of some other uses, other ways you might be able to use it. So if you buy the sort of Taroka deck, which, you know, I can't remember how much I paid for it, maybe like £10, just a little over $10, then, you know, you want to get use out of that. You don't want to just use it, you know, once and that's it, and you never get it out of the drawer again. I've got a DM's Guild supplement, and then I thought of other ways you might be able to use your Taroka decks. You can draw some more cards from it. Another idea I've had as well is I do how I've run domain videos, because I'm running a domain hopping campaign at the moment, and I've run places like Falachan, Volkovnia, Demonliu, the Sea of Sorrows. It'd be that series still, but instead of how I ran domain, it'd be how I'd run domain for domains I haven't run yet or don't plan to run. And I am, due to reasons I don't want to go into in case it's spoilers for something, I've got a renewed interest for Lemordia, and so I might do some research into maps and monsters and what have you for Lemordia, like I do in my How I Ran videos. For, you know, anyone thinking of running Lemordia, hopefully it's useful to them. You know, it gives additional monster suggestions, additional locations, maps, etc. that aren't necessarily covered in Van Richten's guide. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Mist Wanderers.